While we're waiting to go live on Facebook, I want to welcome all of you, all 5 of you that are in Zoom right now, while the live stream is probably going live soon, to our panel about EUJS throughout the ages, with 4 of my predecessors as EUJS presidents. We have Lionel Schreiber, we have Jane Braden-Golay, we have Benny Fisher, and Alina Brickman here. And to give you kind of the vibe of today's discussion, we thought we would start with a video that reflects EUJS' past glory.
In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. At some point, God said, "Let there be light." And some 5,000 or 6,000 years later, on a cold February night in 1978, EUJS was born. Sensing a void in student activism, a group of 150 Jewish students in Grenoble, France, developed a vision for a new brand of student activism. They called it the European Union of Jewish Students, and it was good. European. From the Irish coastline in the west to the Russian Ural Mountains in the east, as far as Tampere in the north and Athens in the south, and including spectacular Istanbul, EUJS covers 34 different countries and a plethora of languages, cultures, and customs. Union. Students from all of these diverse communities, all coming together under one umbrella organization to fight injustice, give a voice to the voiceless, focus on similarities instead of differences, celebrate humanity, and ensure Jewish continuity on the European continent. Jewish, bringing together young people of Jewish heritage from all levels of religiosity and spirituality, EUJS strives to include every facet of Jewish life on the continent. Students, thousands of young people from all walks of life, experts in training in every field imaginable, have been joining together for 30 years to be not just the hope of tomorrow, but the leaders of today. The story of the European Union of Jewish Students is not only a story of an organization that has always been ahead of its time, but also of a union of individuals, myriad personal identities, nationalities, languages, and cultures, all interlinked by a common bond of Judaism and Jewish identity. For those that have passed through its doors, whether as participants, as staff, or merely as observers, EUJS has become a rite of passage, contributing almost as much to the individual as the individual contributes to the union. It is precisely this bond between the individual and the community that will sustain the telltale enthusiasm and vitality that has come to define EUJS. And where better to celebrate Jewish continuity than at the 25th anniversary of Summer University. Held for the first time in 1983 in the United Kingdom, Summer U is the largest annual Jewish event to occur in Europe. A unique combination of Jewish intellectual and educational workshops, and of course, vacationing in style. Summer U has forged innumerable friendships, and even a few lifelong loves. Whether in Spain or Croatia, Greece or Hungary, over 25 years, Summer U has brought together students and young professionals from different countries across Europe and the world for a week of study and friendship, expanding more rapidly than any of its political counterparts. We are activists, we are politicians, we are leaders. It is with this voice that the European Union of Jewish Students has come to be known, organizing to give voices to those who have been silenced, demonstrating against injustice, reaching across cultural and political divides to create unity and understanding. This is EUJS. In 1982, EUJS extended its hand to Budapest, to Jewish students behind the Iron Curtain. In 1985, we demonstrated against the visit of Ronald Reagan and Helmut Kohl to the Bitburg Cemetery. In 1987, we protested the reception of the Austrian president and former Nazi by Pope John Paul II. In 1989, in conjunction with several Holocaust survivors, EUJS occupied the Sablon Catholic Cathedral in Brussels in protest of the denial by the Vatican of our campaign on the Catholic Carmelite convent in Auschwitz. In 1992, Jewish students from all across Europe mobilized in humanitarian action with the guidance of EUJS to collect clothing for the refugees of the former Yugoslavia. In 2001, delegates from EUJS stood witness to and protested the disastrous World Conference Against Racism in Durban. where hundreds of NGOs trampled on the fundamental values of the United Nations and on the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 2006, we organized a groundbreaking trip to Rwanda as part of the EUJS campaign, Shared Memories, Collective Action. This mission gathered third-generation Jewish Holocaust survivors and first-generation Tutsi genocide survivors to bridge cultural boundaries and fight genocide denial. Also in 2006, EUJS earned accreditation to the United Nations, and to this day we remain the only Jewish youth organization accredited to the UN. Whether for oppressed peoples around the world or for our own rights as Jews in a culturally divisive Europe, we continue to stand up for what we know is right, as a group and as individuals. The European Union of Jewish Students shows the world, our communities, and ourselves that the power of youth and promise of continuity should never be underestimated. After our first 30 years of student activism, we are celebrating the future of Jewish student activism, and the future of Jewish continuity and life on the European continent. EUJS, its member unions, and Summer University revolve around the spirit of unity and common experience, the activism and the pluralistic harmony of youth. Above all else, EUJS revolves around youth.
We love EUJS!
So, after this nice throwback to how EUJS represented itself 12 years ago, I thought we would jump in while I will still try to go live. So we wanted to start off by, this is also very much EUJS style, having technical issues, although this is the first web session where we have those, I have to say. So we thought to start this panel off by actually giving you an overview of all of your terms. So Lionel, why don't you start and give a short overview of what you loved most about your term, what your greatest achievements were, and how you would characterize your term in a nutshell in general.
Okay, thanks. I think my term was in 2000, how much was it actually? 2004, 2002? Till 2000, so it was 2004, 2006, right, Bini?
I think so, yes.
Okay. I think what we tried to do during that time was twofold. One of the things we tried to do is fundraise a bit American style for UJS, so learn from American organization how we could better fundraise for UJS. And the second thing was activity-wise and programming-wise, work as much as possible with other organizations, youth organizations, non-Jewish organizations. And so we spent a lot of time trying to build bridges with Rome organization, Tutsi organizations, Muslim organizations, etc. With sometimes quite a lot of difficulties, actually. But it was really a moment where we tried to open up at the time as much as possible to other non-Jewish youth organizations that were facing similar topics as we do. And the third topic was probably to try to reconnect with the Jewish world on the topic of community building, which was also quite challenging because at the time most Jewish organizations were more focused on Aliyah, and it was very difficult to align people on community building in Europe. Bini, I don't really know how you want me to discuss the topic, or if you want me to dig deeper into one of the three priorities I had at the time.
I think what could be especially interesting is the community building aspect, because I really think that EUJS was one of the first organizations, or their first organization, to properly do that.
I think context-wise, the challenge we had is that, for example, organizations like the Jewish Agency for Israel, at the time we started, was only focused on Aliyah. So all funding that we could get for let's say Jewish students from Jewish organizations was focused on getting Jews outside of Europe and to Israel. And what we tried to do is explain that, we believed in a Jewish life outside of Israel in Europe, and that we thought that it was beneficial for Israel at the time to promote Jewish life here. I think it's a bit the same message that we always had, but it was a message we really tried to give across. And around that time, there was a huge, let's say, change in dogma from the Jewish Agency for Israel, where they realized that indeed it was actually more important to create a Jewish connection with Israel, so a connection between European Jews and Israel, and that we didn't have to absolutely focus on Aliyah. And then they started creating the Masa program and all these kind of programs that were, the idea was to provide to young Jewish students an experience of Israel without forcing them to move and do Aliyah. I think that was the let's say the first start of this community building exercise. The second part, there were a few other organizations who were already a bit focused on Jewish community building. The second one was JDC. JDC was already very much involved, but mainly involved with Russia and Eastern European Jewry. And the third one was Chabad. So Chabad was extremely aggressively doing community building in Europe. And between the three organizations, we tried to find a way to promote community building in a way where decision, let's say, community would be built up from youth, and decision making would be done by young people. And so what we ended up doing was, with Yafi, try to fund one position within EUJS that would try to help building Jewish programs for unions. With the JDC, we tried to make sure that in the leadership of communities, there would be always young people, which was not always a success. And with Chabad, it became more of a conflict because actually the way they worked with Jewish communities was quite often at the time conflictual. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lionel. Let's maybe move chronologically. Jane, do you want to give us a short overview of your term?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jane. I'm originally from Switzerland, but now I live in Sweden, in Stockholm. I hope all of you out there are doing okay given the current situation. So to give an overview of my EUJS time, I'll just try to focus in on certain things, and hopefully later on in questions we can maybe talk about some things more in depth. I was on the board for 4 years. I was vice president actually for 4 years before I became EUJS president. And I became EUJS president, I was president 2014 and 2015. So those 2 years. And I would say what definitely shaped my 2 years full time in the office was definitely, and not just an increase in anti-Semitism, but also a real recognition and a lot of new platforms that wanted to take up the issue of anti-Semitism politically. So in 2014, there had been attacks in Brussels on the Jewish Museum, which really shaped my team's experience in Brussels. We had to move offices. We didn't feel very safe. It was quite a tough time. And in 2015, I mean, Charlie Hebdo and Hyper Cacher in Paris. So, I mean, these are just a few things that happened, but those things really led to there being a lot of meetings and a lot of conferences that EUJS all of a sudden got invited to. Meaning, I mean, way back, EUJS had also had access to these kind of high-level meetings, but we had a dip. We had quite a crisis in around 2010, 11 in EUJS. We nearly went bankrupt. And so we had been working ourselves back up. And then all of a sudden, 2014, 15, it felt like we were everywhere. And that included, for example, I got invited by the then US ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, to speak at her residence to, you know, a group of ambassadors and members of Congress. And I mean, all kinds of EU and Council of Europe. I mean, it was crazy. I did this nearly all of the time. And I have to say, as important as it felt to have this access and to bring a Jewish student perspective to the conversation, it was also really difficult because to us, to me, my board, our members, it was clear that this isn't the only story that's happening and that there's so much else going on. And there's also a lot of hope and positivity. So highlights were definitely finding ways to focus on that, aside from the anti-Semitism stuff. And we did a lot of really cool seminars, a lot of interfaith. There was a big cooperation with something called the Muslim Jewish Conference. We started a series of seminars together with the Roma and Armenian organizations called Europe of Diasporas, which was fantastic. We opened up new ground with a series called Sex in the Community, which looked more into LGBTQ questions, which at least in the years I'd been in EUJS, we hadn't really talked about, and a lot of student unions hadn't been thinking about yet. And another thing that was a big turn, and I have to say, when I started EUJS, and I'm a Swiss person, and I was living in Switzerland, so the UN was a huge focus of my EUJS time. It's how I first met EUJS. When I was a member of the board living in Switzerland, I had a yearly pass to the UN. I was there a lot. That was really kind of when I thought about political activism in EUJS, it was at the United Nations Economic and Social Council and the Human Rights Council. Then, with the anti-Semitism thing increasing, there was also more focus on the European level again, which now maybe looking back, it seems like, well, obviously you're in Brussels, like, aren't you doing EU stuff all the time? It wasn't such a given back in those 6 years that I was involved. And we saw a real turn towards EU institutions during my time. We started something called the EU Activism Seminar, which was a parallel to what we were doing at the UN for quite a couple of years. And we, together with B'nai B'rith, it was actually initiated by a former EUJS executive director who then went to B'nai B'rith and said, listen, should we have a shared fellow whose focus is on the EU, our EU policy fellow? And I think that's still running. So there was this real focus, and I always said, well, look at me, a Swiss person was infiltrated the European Union. I always felt a bit strange because, yeah, Switzerland's not part of the EU. Anyway, so those were definitely highlights. And on a kind of bit more boring structural level, it was also figuring out ways to get EUJS a bit more stable. Nothing's ever stable in EUJS. Nothing's ever stable in the world. But to get some kind of level of financing going that can keep core aspects of the organization running, that was a big goal. And another highlight, I have to say, when I started EUJS in 2009, there was usually always only one person running to be EUJS president, and it was kind of a given, you know, you just, I'm going to do a job. Everybody voted for that person, and that was it. And I set myself the goal that I was like, I want there to be at least 2 people, like serious candidates, qualified candidates, enthusiastic candidates, running for the position of president at the end of my term. And that happened. And that is a great segue over to Benny, I suppose, unless there is a question.
It was really the perfect segue. And that's always the problem when you have 5 presidents in one room that everyone talks a lot. So I know this is not that easy for you, Benny, but try to give us an overview about your term and try to keep it short and sweet.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me and for doing this, obviously. Great idea, great programming, great background, Bini. Yeah, so I mean, I think it already became apparent that my immediate predecessor, Jane, was an extremely talented person who handed over this organization in a more stable and extremely well, strong position, to be honest. And I think when trying to summarize what we did during my term, which was between 2015 and 2017, and we being, well, Jonathan Keeson, who was the executive director back then, and then in the second year, Andras Ligeti, obviously then also a bigger team. We tried to keep the level of political strength that the organization had. We tried to take the lessons learned from the new programming that was established, further develop it, and especially open access to the organization. So for me, as someone who came from Germany, which, and I think now it's really impossible to imagine because of what's going on in SummerU and all of these things, but back then I was really the only German. I mean, I think when I got elected, there were like 3 Germans at SummerU with me, and there was no German union. And this is only one example. There were other countries that were in a very similar situation. So one thing that we really got to understand is, because of the experience that I had coming from Germany, that there are so many great things happening on a national level that we are not part of, or that we need to connect to. So the idea really was to take this amazing platform, make it more approachable, and really to try to turn it into a movement. So the lessons learned from the first EU Activism seminar, which was the very seminar that I got, through which I got a part of EUJS, was that, okay, we have to seize this opportunity that we have being here in Brussels and make this at least 3, 4, 5 times a year. So we would invite student groups coming over to Brussels, bring them to the parliament. We did like EUJS TV from the parliament, crazy stuff. The second thing is we really tried to reestablish, yeah, you should totally watch it. It's super funny. We had like a Hanukkah, I don't know whether you know that, like a Hanukkah version of it. The second thing is we really helped.
Again.
Sorry?
If Parliament opens again ever.
Yeah, no, but it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You should totally watch it on YouTube. We then we actually did help re-establishing unions. I mean, the German union came about in 2017. You are a perfect example. I mean, the Austrian union came from nothing. I remember how some of you came to the Yad Vashem seminar in the end of 2015, and I mean, look where it led to. And I think the idea really was using the resources that we were fortunate to have due to the great work that was done before us, in order to properly make everything grow. A new thing that we started is we established a new position, a program officer, understanding that we need to invest more in the quality of our programming. And this is actually, I think, a perfect transition to who's coming next, because the very first person that we hired became my immediate and far more talented and beloved successor, Alina Brickman, who, and this was actually also great, who stood in an election with another former board member, Talia Bidusa from Italy. So we were in the end of my term, I think we were at a point where we had understood, okay, to some extent we were able to keep things great. We were able to make them a bit more stable, and at the same time have more people being part of that. And I think that was an amazing feeling, especially because it meant that throughout the term, there was a complete focus on working with people, driving, really traveling through Europe, meeting lots and lots of people. Yeah. Last thing, and this is the very famous rule, I'm sorry. So one rule that we copied actually from another organization from the US was that whenever we traveled to Europe, we would try to stay at other students' places, which is why until today my bag is destroyed. But the idea really was that you can only understand communities when having, real talk over noodle water that is cooking, and not in a formalized meeting. And this is really something that I think both for me personally, but also for the organization, was a very, very important step to take. Yeah. Short summary. That was not so short.
Thanks a lot, Benny. But you can see that this is truly an all-star panel, because both Jane and Benny have made the perfect segue to their successor. So without further ado, Alina.
Yeah, so hi everyone, also from me. It's quite really sweet experience to be joining my predecessors and my successor today. It's fascinating to actually listen to Jane and Benny speak one after the other and realize that not only did their terms succeed each other, but a lot of the you can really see the organizational intertwinement. Benny was a participant in Jane's EU activism seminar. I was a participant in Benny's EU activism seminar and a lot of other activities that he ran. And as he mentioned, I was lucky enough to join his team as program officer in 2016, I believe it was. And then I decided to run kind of having him as my only model of an EUJS president, or the most immediate potential model. I remember showing my dad a video of Benny speaking in the EU Parliament on a panel about the future of Jews in Europe. And obviously he was the only young person there, and he was actually, you know, calling out the organizers of the event for having an event on the future of Jews in Europe and having him as the only young Jew there. And I remember my dad being completely like totally impressed of Benny's speaking abilities, which for me was very stressful because I was running at the time. So it was quite intimidating to see my own dad being so impressed by this other guy that I was trying to succeed. But what I'd like to do is kind of take a step back. When Bini invited me to speak on the panel, I thought it was a nice opportunity, also having quite a bit of free time now, to reflect on kind of what was the, let's say, historical background that was going on during my term. Because when you're in that moment, it's harder to kind of take note of different trends that are going on. But with a bit of hindsight, it really becomes much clearer. So I was elected in 2017. I started my term in September 2017. Who else started their term in 2017 was Donald Trump. Few days before my election, there was the march in Charlottesville. And I think that was a clear signal that following the somewhat numerous radical Islamist terrorist attacks that had happened in Europe and around the world, there was this really tangible and growing backlash of right-wing extremism, nationalism, xenophobia, and so on. And I think at the time I wasn't so aware of it, but now looking back, it's just country after country that can be named in this category. In Austria, Bini was leading the Austrian Union of Jewish Students and, you know, kind of sounding the alarm really early on with the FPO going into government there. We had Hungary and Poland. In Hungary, we had all these Soros anti-Semitic conspiracies and all this anti-immigrant rhetoric and so on. In Poland, we had the Holocaust bill, but also a lot of, you know, attacks to the basic justice system in the country, to the LGBT community. In France, we had, you know, Marine Le Pen gaining a lot of traction, Salvini, and really the list goes on and on. And I think this kind of was building up towards the EU elections in 2019. I think generally elections have this power of galvanizing more extremism than your usual other period, so it became really visible. And in the same period, you also had the attack in Pittsburgh and also the attack in Christchurch. But I think in parallel to all this right-wing extremist nationalist wave, there was really an amazing progressive answer and counter wave, let's say. And I think it mostly galvanized around two themes: the, you know, move towards more climate awareness and climate justice, and then gender equality, calling out sexual harassment, really exposing that. But I think it was also generally a very, like, an atmosphere that was generally very progressive. And I think EUJS, at least in my understanding of EUJS, but I'm sure that resonates with everyone, really fit into that counter wave somehow. At the same time, in that counter wave, I don't think there was a real understanding of how Jewish stuff fits in. How do Jews fit into this whole progressive narrative? And I think that is where we managed to do some important and relevant progress, kind of bring some relevant and also long-lasting input on that front. So one thing that I was very excited to manage to get through is a motion on anti-Semitism and Jewish life in general through the European Youth Forum, the biggest youth organization in Europe and by some measurements in the world, that allowed this enormous body of sub-NGOs to get a better sense of what are Jewish issues, what is anti-Semitism, how is it being experienced by young Jews, and also to publish in partnership with the European Commission and the Fundamental Rights Agency the first ever report of the experiences of young Jews, which I think will remain a valuable tool for many years to come in EUJS. And another important thing I think is a decision to kind of make EUJS's positions on issues more explicit and to restart a kind of tradition of having policy votes at our General Assembly, which Bini has already been very involved in as president of a member organization, and I'm sure will only take it to the next level at the next General Assembly. I'm really super curious to see it. But the highlight was definitely the amazing, amazing teams that I got to work with, and I will be super cheesy now. And with that, I pass it back to Bini.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you all very much. It's really inspiring to hear you all talk about your terms. And I would love to also be able to talk about my term now, but we need to keep things moving. Also, my term is only a quarter done, so we got to keep things moving. For the next segment, we thought about having some rapid fire questions that could be more juicy than what you have talked about so far. So I would ask you all to answer the questions and answer them quickly, and whoever has an answer first can shout it out. But it would be great if all of you could answer all the questions.
And everyone can unmute themselves.
Yeah, you should unmute yourselves. I'm also gonna.
We need a buzzer. We need a buzzer, man.
Yeah, we need a buzzer, right?
Yeah.
By the way, we can't go live on Facebook, but that's not our issue. Apparently, Zoom globally has an issue right now with going live on Facebook. But we're very happy to have 15 participants.
Perfect timing, Zoom. No, perfect timing.
I think it was intentionally. I think it was anti-Semitic. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so who was the most annoying SAMU participant you have ever met? You don't have to name names.
German guy sat in a restaurant, SAMU Italy, that was right behind our synagogue. And throughout the entire service, he kept on shouting Russian slurs into the car. Undoubtedly the best, yeah. His entire body was burned, sunburned. It was great.
Okay, who else has the most annoying SAMU participant?
You can just your generic French person, with my apologies to Elias, who I can spot here as the only French person listening to us.
Jane, Lionel?
For some reason, everyone I can think of is German.
Well, it's always the people who know you best, like your friends from back home who you convince to come to SAMU, who feel like you should be doing them extra favors. Those are the most annoying ones, because you have a big event to run and you do not make special favors.
Lionel?
Or you do, but not if they ask you like that.
I think for me, it was mainly the parents calling up the office and asking if their kids could please join, even if there was no space left, and calling us every day, morning, afternoon, evening, to make sure that if there was a spot coming free, their son would be able to come.
And it's always a son, isn't it?
The next question is, who was your favorite union? And Benny, Ali, I know you have to answer Austria, but Lionel, Jay. No, just kidding. But who was your favorite union?
That's a tough one.
Now you can spill the
The
beans.
politician in me is like, no, I can't go there.
I can't do that. You can.
I mean, they were so different, man.
I think we did a very nice seminar in my time with the Istanbul Union. I don't know if it's still very active or not, but it was, just after the bombing in the synagogue in Istanbul. And for me, it was a discovery of an extremely warm and welcoming community that I had never seen elsewhere in Europe.
Along those lines, because I mean, I learned a lot of very different things from different unions because they are so different. But I mean, something that's particular in my mind was the Macedonian Union. We did a seminar there, a Holocaust seminar, together with our Yad Vashem favorite person, Yoni Berus. He came with us to Macedonia, and I wound up doing my bachelor thesis about the Jewish community there. And it started a whole thing for me. And I thought it was really lovely getting to know both the union, but also that very small community.
It's really hard for me to say which union was my favorite one. One thing that I will never forget was the time I visited the General Assembly of the French Union of Jewish Students.
Oh.
That was insane. That was from really the first second until the very last. That was an insane experience. As in, people sleeping on the tables, 4 a.m. all of a sudden everyone starts dancing so that they can keep on working, and they actually did work, and somehow they managed to finish things and to pass so many policies. That was crazy to see.
Yeah, so they do their General Assembly at night. That's why it's still going at 4 a.m. Yeah, I mean, there's really no favorite union, but a lot of like really heartwarming moments with, one union at a time. But I think something that was really sweet for me to see was how leaving the EUJS, some of my former team members really became active back home. And, like the Italian union is super active these days. And the Portuguese union is, starting now to develop. So I think a lot of credit goes to, these people becoming super motivated and being active back home. And a little shout out to Ale and Dani.
That was a very good answer. I just want to clarify, I love all unions equally.
Oh, come on. Oh, that's so unfair. You have to say that.
Let's move on to the next question. What was the weirdest moment in your term?
I don't want to jump in first again, but it's a super key answer. Summer year 2016, waking up in the morning, understanding that we had just survived an earthquake, going to meet the Pope, having 400 Jewish parents calling you on a concert row, coming back, having your first second to breathe during a team meeting, and all of a sudden the Ukrainian Union running into our team meeting with bottles of vodka, wanting to celebrate Ukrainian Independence Day with us. As in the moment that I had realized that the very first second I have to breathe after this day is filled with Ukrainian Independence Day, and this is the line of things that just happened, that was a good moment. That was yeah.
Nice. Jane, Ali, Lionel, do you have something? This is rapid fire question. You don't have time to think.
Okay, so I think it was like my third, maybe 6th day at EUJS. I was program officer, and we had a big deadline submission. And of course, it was Sunday, 11:55 p.m. having to submit. I was in the office with Benny. We were just going through this story earlier today. And yeah, there we were, 11:59. Of course, we were able to click submit. And then we celebrated with some techno music and some small and responsible gin shots. It happened to be in the office.
Yeah, there was day 3.
Very nice initiation. You know, stability, stability, stability.
Jane?
God, it's so lame, but I can't think of anything. It's too. My problem is that I'm thinking of like, and it's all mushed together. 6 years of EUJS.
Lionel, do you have something?
He had to unplug. He just wrote, but he's extremely sorry.
So sorry.
So are we. Who was the most annoying politician that you had to deal with?
No, I can't say the name. Immediate ability to speak. He's still active. No.
But we are not live on Facebook, so.
Right, but
I so much hope my successor does this as well and asks me all these questions.
I mean, for some reason during my term, Bernard-Henri Lévy was like everywhere all the time. And I remember how the first 2 times I saw him, I was just blown away by his intellect, his ability to speak, his presence, everything. And by the 3rd time, I started to realize he's the most French human being on the planet, personifying every stereotype that is out there. And that there is quite a bit of arrogance involved as well. He's not a politician. I'm a big fan. I still am. I think he's a great writer and all of that. But you know, once you start reading a bit more of him and the whole appearance, that was fun. But he was not annoying. I mean, annoying would be unfair to say. Well, the entire far right, Beatrix von Storch came to the parliament during my presidency, I remember. Marine Le Pen, you would meet them in the parliament. That was fun.
Nice, good times. Ali, Jane, do you have something?
Well, I mean, this wasn't during my presidency. This was during my very first contact with EUJS, which was something called the Durban Review Conference in 2009 at the UN in Geneva. And I guess it's fair to say that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was the most annoying politician. And it resulted in, for example, the French Union of Jewish Students busting into the General Assembly Hall wearing clown noses and disrupting the speech, and you just getting thrown out of the UN, and all kinds of fun things like that. So I think that still takes the cake of everything I've been a part of.
Okay, and last but not least, because that seems to be a staple of every EUJS presidency, what was the weirdest place you lived as EUJS president?
I lived in the same place all the time, which Benny also lived in. And I thought it was a pretty good place, actually.
Yeah,
The only thing is that it was really there, like you could hear everything. Like there was like cracks in the door this big. And so, you know, when you have roommates, weirdness happens.
It was a great apartment.
But it was a great
It was weird. It was great, but it was weird. I mean,
Yeah,
there were
there
4
was
yoga
yoga
teachers living with me.
in there all the time. I decided I want to live alone. And so I could only afford a tiny room on the ground floor of a building, which didn't have a bathroom. So I had a bathroom in the basement of the building, which was basically open to everyone, theoretically, but I was the only one officially using it. So whenever there were like workers coming to do work on the building, they would use that one, and it was very clear when that had happened. But it was
God.
Thanks a lot. And as last segment of this panel, we have a little rant wheel where the 3 of you have prepared some rants that you always wanted to rant on. Let's see if this works, unlike the live stream. Yeah, I think it does. So let's spin the wheel and see who gets to rant first.
I'm so excited for this.
Wait.
Oh, hey.
Anti-Semitism sob stories. I think that was Jane.
Oh yeah, I'm sure everyone else can also rant about that. But yes, so I want to rant about all these panels, especially in America, that I have been invited to, where everyone wanted to hear was just, the saddest, most depressing story about just how hard and sad it is to be a Jew in Europe. And I just didn't want to talk about that. And I've actually been told off by panel organizers afterwards because I started talking about other things than sob stories. But yeah, so.
So wait, you want to tell me that Europe is not a wasteland of anti-Semitism?
No, it is. It is. Give us money.
I very much feel you. Let's do another round. Being perceived as an ambassador of the state of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, that's self-explanatory. That happens all the time. It's this great moment when people start speaking about Israeli settlements as a response to you speaking about conspiracy theories in, member state XYZ. Like, yeah, it's self-explanatory. It's something that happens to our constituency all the time. But there are great moments when, like, people don't see you in action, but you just meet in private life or someone randomly on the street, and then you tell them what they do, what you do, and you get these great questions of like, yeah, do you have connections to the Mossad? How, how's your, like, those are good moments. Those are, yeah.
Let's do another one. Let's try again. Ooh, this is also a good one. Patronizing European Jews.
That's again me, but I think others can recognize this one too. Essentially looking down on us European Jews as the ones that need to be helped and need support with pretty much everything. And essentially also telling us what we need and how we need help. And just generally not feeling to be perceived as an equal. And again, I'm mainly talking about Israeli and American organizations that have this mission to help the poor European Jews.
Yeah. It's funny because when I read this, I had to think about
Jewish
leadership.
Those patronizing European Jews. Well, you can do that too, because those are essentially the old people sitting in all the Jewish organizations.
Like when you speak about BDS and the average age is 60 plus and everyone tells you what to do, it's great.
So are there still Jews left in Europe? That's the question I wanted to raise. Meetings without agendas.
Was this bad news?
Yeah, that's a full rant. But Alina, I will give you the first. Sorry.
No, please go for it.
No, I mean, come on, like Jews, like, and it's no matter where you are, you start a meeting, you just casually drop what you want to speak about, and your opposite directly jumps into the first completely random discussion to then experience 2.5, 3-hour meetings that go everywhere, where you speak about how weird Hungarian sounds, or which is great and it's true. But like, when you leave and you feel exhausted, you don't know what you just spoke about, nothing has been achieved, but everyone feels a bit bad. Entertaining, and it becomes a talent. Like, you learn how to small talk really in these settings. Yeah.
And now we're all lucky enough to experience those through Zoom. Jane, you also raised your
No,
hand.
I just wanted to say, building on that, meetings that keep happening again and again and again, where you talk about the exact same thing over years.
Yeah.
Those are great too.
Other people thinking we are rabbis. Benny had a lot to rant about.
Yeah, that happened to me. That you tell someone what you do and you're like, what? Like, am I? Or... No, that was a great moment actually. It was in Parliament. And then, you know, the best way of people telling you that would be like saying something like, you know, religion is so outdated. Like, you know, when people imply what they want to say, they don't directly say it, but they completely reduce you to you being like a religious fundamentalist. Favorite quote in that context, EU activism 2015, the assistant of an MEP who was back then part of a very important intergroup for us, telling us that we Jews should just stop feeling so important and crying around, because after all, we're only what did he say? It's only a religion or something like that. It was a great moment. It was a great moment. Yeah.
There's a few left that we haven't talked about yet.
I will stop jumping in now, I promise.
Okay,
There's so much to rant about.
Let's just do the last ones that are left. Alina, I think you gave us a suggestion: inequality.
Yeah, it's my fault for not submitting enough rants. Yes, so I mean, I meant mostly gender inequality, but I think, yeah, that's clear. Everyone knows what we're talking about here, but at the same time, there were some situations that really kind of shocked me, like having a meeting of 20 activists and a speaker is being, you know, in a plenary session, clearly flirty. You have like a 50-year-old member of the European Parliament who is literally flirting with participants while delivering his input. Or another man that we used to work with from time to time, who every time we got a new female employee, and it was around actually 3 different women who joined our team gradually, would add them on Facebook and start dropping them messages, inviting them for coffee. And the more this happened, the more it became clear it was a pattern. So yeah, I think, you know, I always imagine this political bubble of Brussels as having put, like, I was sure that a lot of this stuff is happening in the background, but it was an interesting awakening to actually experience it firsthand.
Thanks a lot. And last but not least, the last round, because I very much look forward to this, Hasbara and flash drives.
Yes!
Right?
Yes! Anyone who wants to go first?
What do the flash drives refer to?
Now, I mean, come on. When you speak about Israel-related anti-Semitism, or basically no matter what, any especially inner Jewish meeting, where some especially older person would completely out of context start speaking about, no, but Israel is a startup nation, you know, we invented ICQ, flash drive, startup nation, you know, and you know, and everyone in the room knows it. Like, it's okay, we got it. Like, it's this, you know, as if someone really wouldn't know that. It's this moment where, you know, okay, now we're gonna lose at least 10 to 15 minutes, because the worst thing about these settings is that eventually someone will join in, you know? They will join in. And, yeah, and how great is hummus? And by the way, Gordon, you know, like it's and the worst actually is that there are some people who mean it seriously, like who are so bad in their Hasbarero dogma that they would do this in the most unfitting contexts and would use this as political argumentation, you know, like there is anti-Semitism because people don't know about the flash drive, you know, the heart surgery with they take stuff from the pig and we invented the cherry tomato, you know. It's great because you are in a human rights setting. You speak about such important settings and you end up focusing on cherry tomatoes, you know. It's
even BDS uses our flash drives.
BDS fans,
No,
did you know about this? And the best moment is when they then start yelling, you know, when all of a sudden they start yelling at you as if they were speaking to their opponents, you know, like, did you know Microsoft had an office near Tel Aviv? Did you know you cannot use Apple without Israeli technology? Like, it's great. It's great.
Thank you very much. On that note, let's hope Israel soon finds a vaccine for Corona so we can finally destroy anti-Semitism. I think this concludes our session, which at least helped me a lot to get through these hard times. I don't know how you felt, but I enjoyed it very much. So thank you all for joining. And we have lots of other exciting sessions coming up. Tomorrow we have our first session, our series of interviews with union leaders, and with Simone Santoro, the president of EUJS, the Italian Union of Jewish Students. And on Tuesday, we are hosting together with the German Union of Jewish Students, member of European Parliament, Sergei Lagodinsky. Thank you very much for joining. See you soon, and most importantly, stay home.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks. Great to see you all.
Bye.
Great ranting. Let's do it again.
Yeah, totally.
Bye.